bad news when it comes to Mickey 17. The good news is that this is an acting tour de force for Mr. Robert Pattinson. I know. I think we're all starting to see that he's a great actor, but he really steps up to like a new level with this film. So we've been talking about how we got it mixed up, right? Where Timothée Chalamet is actually following in the footsteps of Leonardo DiCaprio, and Robert Pattinson is the one taking the path of Mr. Johnny Depp. And Mickey 17 is a perfect example of that. It's such a Johnny Depp movie, but yet Robert Pattinson handles it beautifully. You're not like, Johnny Depp would have done it better. You're like, Robert Pattinson, you really stepped up your game here. Pattinson not only does an excellent job playing all the Mickeys, but he's able to make the main Mickey, Mickey 17, extremely sympathetic and charming, even though Mickey 17's not very bright. And Robert Pattinson's able to portray that as well. Pattinson broke my heart in the opening scene. I literally said out loud, "Aw, I wanted to protect and save him immediately." I was like, "You leave him alone." I loved him. And I also thought he was surprisingly relatable because we've all felt like Mickey 17, I think especially lately. Pattinson also does a great job of balancing out some of his quirkier choices, like his Harley Quinn Seymour-esque accent, but also still, at the same time, still giving his performance the depth and nuance it needs for you to take it seriously. Some of the other actors here don't do as good a job in that regard. Some of the movie is too broad. I'd say the other actor who really stands out here is Steven Yeun, who finally, after The Walking Dead, and of course Invincible, but he just does voice work there on the main character, but Yeun is finally given a substantial live action role that he can really sink his teeth into and make a strong impression on the screen. All right, so what's that bad news? This is not very original, this film. It's not very original for Bong Joon-Ho. This is Snowpiercer and Okja smooshed together. And for that reason, it doesn't feel very new. You really do feel like you've seen it before. And from Bong Joon-Ho. If you've seen, in fact, I've seen most of Bong Joon-Ho's films. And I bet if you're interested in Mickey 17, you've probably seen most of them as well. It's particularly his more genre-y ones outside of Parasite. Parasite leveled Bong Joon-Ho up to the next level, That's interesting. Parasite kind of was supposed to level up Bong Joon-Ho to the next level as a filmmaker, and I think he has backslid substantially with this movie. He's right back to making the kind of movies he did before, which I think is, I don't know, probably comforting to his hardcore fans, but he didn't have a lot of hardcore fans before Parasite. He was very much a niche filmmaker. And so the fact that he doesn't seem to have learned anything from Parasite is surprising. Somebody should point that out to him. I just did. But besides feeling repetitive, I have two really big problems with Mickey 17. So the first is it's trying to say too many things, and therefore it ends up not really being as impactful as it otherwise could be if it had picked one or just really, you really should pick one, but if it had picked maybe just two and really focused on them. So obviously it's a commentary on capitalism and also the current political situation that so many countries find themselves in today worldwide. America's really the face of it these days, but a lot of countries are going through the same thing. And I think not to recognize that is not as sophisticated. This movie's actually not very sophisticated. All right, so it's also obviously a very strong commentary on lab animals. But here, a human is being used as a lab animal thanks to advancements in cloning. Although they never really sold me on why they wanted or needed to bring Mickey back. Like, they never really ask him for any feedback about his experiences. They just go off the data that they got from the last copy. So you'd still have that data even if you didn't bring Mickey back. And then there's the big question of the movie that's been in the trailers. And what does it feel like to die? But Mickey never answers that question. He makes some attempts at it, but the movie never really answers that question, despite bringing up that question multiple times. Maybe that's their answer, but I felt that they dropped the ball on that aspect of the movie. I guess being able to bring Mickey back after he dies each time erases the moral dilemma of using a human as a lab animal. And I wish they had underscored that more, because you do wonder, because you can tell yourself that you're not really killing Mickey because he comes back. Which brings me to we're going to get to my second biggest problem with the film in a moment. But first, I want to talk about one of my favorite things about the film. And that's that Mickey 17 is its most interesting when it explores the real-world application and considerations of human cloning. I know, I was like, oh, this is interesting. So they address the morality, but also the religious questions that surround it. It's a little severancy in that regard. Personal perspective, like, are all the Mickeys just one Mickey, or are they all their own individuals? That was really great. And that leads to interesting questions of identity. And also how clones can be used, both in a positive manner and then a nefarious manner. There was one small thing that they had in the movie that I actually thought was like, I don't want to give it away, but it really captured my interest. I was like, oh, I wish that could be its own movie. I wish we'd done more with that. These are new questions that Hollywood hasn't really explored to death yet. Speaking of reviving and bringing and killing things. Because the science and technology hurtle forward at an unexpectedly increasing rate. Like we're like, whoa, like we're just hurtling towards the future suddenly. You imagine that we might actually be asking these questions in real life sooner rather than later, which I think makes them hit even harder. And again, Robert Pattinson really helps to underscore all of these questions and discussions with his performance. Mickey 17 and 18 are a fascinating contrast. Even though you could have the same memories and therefore life experiences and the same genetics, what would you be like with a little tweak? What would a bolder version of you be like, and a more timid version? That was all very, very interesting. At least I found that the case. All right, so what is my second biggest problem with the film? So I think it goes too broad, as I said. And the chief the people who did that the most were Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette. Now, in the film's defense, in Bong Joon-Ho's defense, I guess you could say this comes from the style of, let's say, Japanese anime. It reminds me a little bit of Miyazaki, where some characters, often the villains, are exaggerated and grotesque, perhaps because they're the villains. And here, these are the villains. And so I guess, that's the artistic inspiration for the choice. But, I'll tell you why I don't think it works here. Clearly, Ruffalo and Collette are doing their take on Trump and MAGA, right? But after Sebastian Stan's brilliantly nuanced depiction of Trump in The Apprentice, the critique here seems childish and therefore unhelpful. Talk about sliding backwards. Just like Bong Joon-Ho's artistic work, I feel this is sliding backwards on, the exploration of what's really going on with the current political climate. It just seems like petulant, like schoolyard bullying. And it doesn't offer any real insight into what's actually going on or solution. Because the thing is, yes, we're dealing with a lot of problems in real life these days, and this movie is supposed to reflect that. And a lot of these problems are being caused by MAGA, but if you're going to be fair and really try to figure out what's going on here, you have to understand that there are problems that are responsible for the creation of MAGA. And this isn't just an American issue, even though America has become the face of it, but you're seeing this dynamic worldwide in multiple countries. So there's really something going on here, and it's just being dismissed here with farce. And that kind of made me a little frustrated and annoyed, because I'm like, this is a serious situation. And, you're again, I don't think farce is the way to go when addressing it. And so I found that aspect of the film to be annoying and frustrating. Again, a real step backward after the more nuanced and I think fruitful exploration that was started with The Apprentice. Really, you should check out The Apprentice. That's, it wasn't nominated for some Oscars, particularly for Sebastian Stan and Jeremy Strong, for nothing. All right, so Hollywood has made a lot of movies. Speaking of other movies, Hollywood has made a lot of movies about space travel. But I must say, Mickey 17 is probably what it would actually be like, especially considering how things are going today. Usually, leaving Earth is depicted as this glamorous or, very sleek adventure. Even when, like in the Alien franchise, when it's truckers in space, it's not as bad as it is here. Here, it's depicted as an act of desperation. But even then, you're not that much better off. I really like the idea of, because, some people have been tweeting that recently. Can I get off this planet? And you're like, what makes you think it's any better off planet? I mean, humans are going to pack their problems up and take them with them, which I think makes a lot of sense, which is very interesting. I do think the logistics of the ship and of the human cloning are very well thought out. I never questioned what was going on. It never took me out of the story. I wasn't like, wait a minute. I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And of course, the public would be promised an alien paradise, only for it to be a planet like Niflheim from Norse mythology, an ice barren wasteland where they end up. Isn't that just always the way that it goes? Are there any aliens on the planet? Well, you'll see. You've seen hints of them in the trailer. I don't want to give anything away. I thought, though, that I will say that this element of the story was one of its strengths, but also its weaknesses. When it started out, I thought it was very, very interesting. But also I was like, it's Okja. You just did Okja again. But, and on that note, as that storyline progressed, I thought it became less and less original. I was like, we're getting pretty rote here. All right, so let's talk about the cast. Robert Pattinson, he's so good. He really shines here. He's fantastic. And this is an incredible calling card for him as an actor. He said on his press tour that after Batman, it's quite the new experience to suddenly have male fans, because after Twilight, most of his fans were female. And sure enough, I think slowly but surely, it's taken him a minute, but I think Pattinson is really proving himself to be a dynamic actor. But he's not a classic leading man like DiCaprio. Again, instead he's turning into a quirky character actor who makes such interesting choices that he's able to be a lead. Kind of. Let's see what the box office is for Mickey 17. And even Johnny Depp struggled as a lead until he got Alice in Wonderland and Pirates of the Caribbean. And on that note, so I would say that Mickey 17 is similar to Johnny Depp's earlier work, like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Sleepy Hollow, his version of Willy Wonka, where I think his choices were so, like, the movies were smaller. It was just very quirky. His Willy Wonka choices didn't really work out. But, interestingly, Robert Pattinson's Batman is an understated performance. But I think, there's so much going on underneath the surface. It's really brilliant. But seeing Mickey 17, I see a future for Pattinson where he could be a real asset to bigger franchises and films by bringing the quirky factor like Johnny Depp has done, like he did in Alice in Wonderland and Pirates of the Caribbean. And I think that based on what I've seen here, that's the kind of role that Robert Pattinson, the team should be looking for him, where he comes in and is just like Johnny Depp has done, with this just crazy burst of quirky energy, which really captures the audience's imagination. He just does a fantastic job establishing Mickey 17, so that when Mickey 18 shows up, it's all the more shocking and jarring because they're just so different. To see those two very different performances side by side is just a real treat. Like you're like, wow, I love what you're doing with 17. And then you're like, wow, look what you can do with 18. I mean, just to see Pattinson's dual performances here, he plays a couple of Mickeys, but those two in particular, it's reason enough to see the film, at least at some point. So there are other actors in this movie. How about the rest of the cast? So as I said, Steven Yeun is also fantastic. While Naomi Ackie, she's absolutely charming as Mickey 17's girlfriend. When he first sees her and falls in love with her on the ship, I think she really wins over the audience as well. That was a great first moment, and she did a wonderful job with it. And she's a security agent on this spaceship, but the role overall just isn't as exciting as Pattinson and Yeun's. She does what she can with the role. She has one very cool action moment opposite Toni Collette's character, which Ackie executes brilliantly. It happens so quickly, but you're like, wow, that was very good. But while her character has her quirky moments, it's the standard alpha girlfriend that we see so often in this type of movie. And I think that's a little disappointing. The role just isn't as interesting as Pattinson and Yeun's. Patsy Ferran has a much smaller role as the science officer who feels bad for Mickey, and she makes a stronger impression. Not only because the role is a little better, but I think I really like the choices that Patsy Ferran makes as an actress. Cameron Britton from the Umbrella Academy and Mindhunter also makes a very strong impression as the head science officer who has no problem, or at least is willing to experiment on Mickey, and is very afraid of Mark Ruffalo's character. He's in fact brilliantly cast. I loved that Bong Joon-Ho used him here. And as I said, I really didn't like Mark Ruffalo's performance. It comes across as petty and childish and downright embarrassing after what Sebastian Stan accomplished in The Apprentice. Toni Collette fares a little bit better as a first lady, who is actually maybe the most threatening, but her role is also underwritten and, a little bit too broad. Daniel Henshaw is their personal assistant, and his role actually was delightfully menacing, so much so that I thought something would come of it, but nothing ever did. So in a world where Black Mirror exists, Severance, Everything Everywhere All at Once, right, as well as strong commentary in films like Adam McKay's work, Mickey 17, it just isn't enough. It feels very much like a film from the 90s, speaking of, younger Johnny Depp. And it visually isn't cinematic enough for theaters. Although, like a streaming show like Severance, that's not in theaters, and that's far more cinematic than Mickey 17. Bong Joon-Ho, in my opinion, just isn't pushing himself hard enough here. As I said, it's a real backslide for him. I think there are enough interesting elements here, though, that if the subject matter does appeal to you, or if you're a Robert Pattinson fan or a Steven Yeun fan, I think Mickey 17 is worth checking out, again, at some point. You don't need to rush to go and see it. I think, it's eventually going to be on Max because it's a Warner Brothers movie, and that's probably the best place to see it. But, if you feel like going to the movie theater, I think you'll have a fine time, especially if you have an AMC A-list, if you have a subscription, or if, matinee price. It has interesting elements, but I think in other ways it's, a backslide. All right, so that's my review of Mickey 17, which first hits theaters before it works its way through the distribution strategy this Friday. Share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.